where we will talk policy with House Republicans. This, as the White House faces a growing backlash of anger over the separation of families at the border. Hello, everyone, and happy Father's Day. Of course, this is a new hour of America's News Headquarters. I'm Eric Shaw.
And I'm Marthel Neville. The president's meeting will happen just days before the House is expected to vote on two competing immigration bills. One is moderate and the other is more conservative, but both measures address two critical issues, DACA and funding for the border wall. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte making the case for his conservative bill.
We also, as you know, in that bill, move from a terrible visa lottery system to a merit-based immigration system that not just DACA recipients, but other people who are lawfully present in the United States and are young and don't have a pathway for it can use. And we're going to go a long way towards ending chain migration for extended family and moving toward a merit system.
Jillian Turner has more now from Washington. Jillian.
A congressional delegation of Democrats led by Rep. Jerrold Nadler toured a detention facility in Elizabeth, New Jersey earlier today, where children separated from their parents at the southern border are being held. They had some scathing words for President Trump.
Today, Father's Day, we spoke to fathers whose children have been ripped from their arms, who have no idea when or if they will see their children again.
It is a policy that is unacceptable, unjust, un-American, and unconscionable.
Nadler also called the policy, quote, inhumane and vowed to bring a Democratic legislative fix to the House floor on Tuesday. In the meantime, Fox News confirms President Trump will also head to Capitol Hill late Tuesday afternoon to rally Republicans around one of two GOP immigration bills. On the agenda for this meeting are President Trump's big-ticket policy priorities, most notably border security funding, including his multi-billion-dollar request for the wall.
I do think this is a historic opportunity to advance a conservative agenda that we've been trying to do for the last 25 years to structurally change the way we do immigration and make it more merit-based.
Steve Bannon jumping to the president's defense this morning.
It's zero tolerance. I don't think we have to justify. We have a crisis on the southern border.
Other administration insiders insist by enforcing the separation policy, the president's playing a long game. He hopes to ultimately force the Democrats' hand and increase the chances of reaching a broader compromise on immigration that'll curb illegal border crossings, something he firmly believes is in the best security interests of the nation. Arthel?
Jillian Turner. Thanks, Jillian. Eric?
And for more on this, Arthel, and whether or not Republicans can finally seal the deal after all this negotiating, let's bring in John Bussey, associate editor at the Wall Street Journal and a Fox News contributor. So, John, President goes up to Capitol Hill on Tuesday, have this meeting. Do you think they'll actually will be able to hammer out the bill that he can support?
Well, his whole point of going is to give it more momentum, right? The president is there. He doesn't go to Capitol Hill very often. This is an opportunity for him to kind of get into the bill elements that he particularly wants. The chief among those being funding for a border wall, sufficient funding where he can say to his constituents, those people who voted for him in the presidential election, upon which he based, this as one of his pillars of his platform, hey, I delivered for you. So that's what we're going to see. The bills right now they compete in various ways. One has a little bit more funding for the wall than the other. The other has tighter requirements for the Dreamers than the other does.
Like the Goodlatte bill.
Yes, that's right.
It's tougher, is more conservative, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right. So, one of the bills says we'll give 6 years for the Dreamers, and they can get into the process of competing for citizenship. Others says 3 years, things like that, or how much funding is going to be for the wall. Again, difference between the two bills. But this gives him an opportunity to shape that, but also to, do what presidents do on Capitol Hill, which is strong arm and, twist some arms to try to get policy through that he wishes.
Twist some arms and make some deals. Which bill do you think he will go for predominantly? The White House has said he would support both. Will he be able to basically mold the clay during those meetings?
Yeah, I think last week we saw a little confusion on that where he said, look, I'm not going to go for something that's too moderate, but then he backtracked from that. I think he wants a bill, and he's going to want to be able to say going into the midterm elections, I did something on taxes, I did something on immigration, I did something on the wall. He wants to be able to declare those victories. So I'm not sure that he's going to necessarily recede from any particular momentum on Capitol Hill. He's also going to have to address what's happening on the border right now, which is the separation of children from their parents.
That has caused a lot of outrage in some quarters and anger. I mean, look, the critics say that it's cruel, it's heartless, tearing the children away. Supporters say, though, that these families are breaking the law. How do you see that playing out politically?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard not to think of it as heartless, no matter where you are on the political spectrum. And this is something that previous administrations had considered and rejected, saying that this was just not something that they could countenance on the border. The president feels differently. He feels that zero tolerance on the border, again, whether or not you agree with him, is required to do something about an uptick in border crossings. This is complicated because previous administrations had considered this because in the past, parents were kept with the kids but jailed. And the court said you can't jail kids.
That was 1997. So when the agreement from the court came down that said you can't jail adults and the children together, they have to legally put the children someplace else. So
yes.
What do they do?
Yes. Well, what you're seeing is right now what they do, which is pretty traumatic. You put the kids in detention of some sort, and whatever you want to call it, shelters, and you put the parents in jail. And that's what's at controversy right now. Previously, very often what happened was that the parents and the kids would be allowed into the country. There'd be kind of some surveillance of them, maybe an ankle bracelet or some other way of kind of keeping track of the parents. But that there'd be this long backlog before their cases came up. And very often they would just disappear into the country. And that's what the administration, Republicans, many in Congress, feel has been inadequate.
The so-called catch and release.
Yeah. So what do you do about that? And is what we're doing now palatable to the American people?
Well, the president, I mean, it's becoming a political issue. Nancy Pelosi going down to the border, meeting with some of those families, and the Democrats are using it and campaigning on it. But President Obama, we saw those photos. They had kids in a cage. I mean, they were with the parents, but they were literally in the fenced-in, inside type cage environment. How come there wasn't such political blowback under President Obama when we see it with Trump?
Yeah, so I think that there was, and there was a lot of consideration on this. They had all sorts of meetings in the White House ongoing about what to do about this problem, and it kind of dogged the administration for years because, remember, there was this big surge of kids coming in unaccompanied by adults. Now the administration is saying sometimes the kids are being used as kind of foils. They're being used, maybe the parents that are coming in with them aren't really, in fact, their parents, that they're just kind of claiming to be as a way of being able to get into the country, get deeper into the country, and disappear into the country. So that's why this zero tolerance. My suspicion is that something's going to happen about this. There's going to be legislation passed. Paul Ryan has talked about these very much against what's going on the border. Others have discussed whether or not legislation now needs to pass that would supersede what this court decision was, that would say perhaps you're going to have to detain families in some kind of setting, but keep them together.
But that's in one of the bills. I mean, that's in some of the legislation that's being considered right now to basically keep families together. But the president can change this with the phone call.
Yeah, I don't think that his argument that this is the Democrats doing this is accurate. It's a zero tolerance policy initiated by the president. This wasn't happening before. It's happening now. It's happening under President Trump's watch, and that's why he's getting criticized for it. I suspect that his meetings on Capitol Hill next week are going to address this as well.
So, and that's it. The final point: when he has his meetings and he hears from some of the members of Congress about this issue as well as the whole immigration issue, do you expect them to come out and next week finally have legislation that will address this issue that has bedeviled administrations for years and years and years?
Well, the border immigration issue, likely. This particular issue on separating kids from their parents, probably also. But the president's going to say to those who criticize him on this that, okay, well, what was done over the last 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. These have been problems that have been building for years, and you need to have some broader-based reassessment of immigration. And again, whether or not you agree with his approach on this, I think that there's momentum in Congress for finally doing that.
All right, John Bussey, The Wall Street Journal. Great to see you. Thank you for coming on a Sunday afternoon. We'll see what happens in 48 hours. Thank you, John. Arthel?
And Eric and John, there is new reaction to the DOJ watchdog's extensive report on the FBI's handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation as Inspector General Michael Horowitz prepares to testify this week before lawmakers on Capitol Hill. His report uncovering more text messages between FBI officials Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Here's Congressman Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee.
These text messages are very troubling. The fact they were on work email, the fact that they were commingled with emails discussing business, all that's problematic. Again, the IG concluded that none of this affected decision making, but nonetheless, that was completely inappropriate.
Ellison Barber is live from Washington with the latest. Hi, Ellison.
Hi, Arthel. Republicans want to talk to that FBI agent Peter Strzok. The Washington Post is now reporting that Strzok is willing to testify before any congressional committee that asks. Some Republicans say that Strzok needs to lose his job. The top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee didn't go that far, but says the text messages are troubling. Congressman Adam Schiff also says there's been questionable behavior on both sides of the political spectrum.
The report spells out that Loretta Lynch and James Comey talked about a virulent anti-Clinton bias in the New York office, which is of equal concern to Democrats.
The Inspector General says former FBI Director James Comey failed to follow established protocols and made serious errors in judgment over the course of the investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of private email server. Two FBI officials, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, exchanged thousands of text messages, many of them anti-Trump. The IG report is not about the Russia investigation, but President Trump says it discredits it. His personal attorney is now calling for an investigation into the special counsel.
There was no collusion. There was no obstruction. The IG report yesterday went a long way to show that. And I think that the Mueller investigation has been totally discredited.
I believe that the Mueller investigation should be investigated, not because necessarily of Mueller, but because of its genesis in this very, very now completely almost illegal and unethical probe, this Russian probe, that began with Peter Strzok in charge.
President Trump said the IG report completely exonerates him. On that, his attorney, Rudy Giuliani, seems to disagree, at least in part. He told ABC News that he does not think it exonerates the president, but that in some ways it dramatically supports Trump's position that, in his view, people involved in the Clinton probe were for Clinton and against Trump. Arthel?
Ellison Barber, thank you. And want to remind everybody, coming up the next chapter in the Justice Department Watchdog Report with Inspector General Michael Horowitz set to testify before Congress on Tuesday. So what can we expect as the rhetoric heats up on all sides? We will take this up straight ahead.
Well, the holiday ceasefire in Afghanistan took a deadly turn over the weekend. Two separate suicide bombings happened over the past 2 days in the eastern city of Jalalabad. Dozens of people were killed. ISIS now claiming one of those attacks. Connor Powell, live in the Middle East Bureau with more. So, Connor, first, who was the exact and specific target of these terrorist attacks?
Yeah, Eric, this historic ceasefire didn't stop all of the violence in Afghanistan, but it really was important because it was an agreement between the Afghan government and the Taliban. But we saw the Taliban go into cities like Jalalabad, lay down their weapons, and celebrate the Muslim holiday of Eid. And the problem, though, with the ceasefire, though, is it didn't include ISIS, who launched a series of attacks on Taliban fighters. Now, ISIS views both the Afghan government and the Taliban as enemies, and ISIS used this ceasefire to attack the Taliban in two different situations. Yesterday, they killed 36 people, all Taliban fighters or people connected to the Taliban. And today, they launched another attack, killing 19 people in Jalalabad. So this ceasefire was really important for the Afghan government and the Taliban for proving that there is a possibility of a ceasefire, but it excluded the ISIS militants, which really have grown in presence and capability of launching attacks, Eric. And what we saw was that they used this opportunity to attack the Taliban in Afghanistan.
Wow. Well, with ISIS out for blood against the Taliban, I mean, what's the potential of this ceasefire actually, being extended or actually potentially being held at some point?
So there's a lot of hope in Afghanistan that this will pave the way for a larger agreement between the Taliban and the Afghan government. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani said that he would like to extend this ceasefire for several more days at the end of the holidays, which end tonight, Sunday. But the Taliban released a statement saying today that, no, they're going to actually return to the battlefield on Monday. Still, it is being hailed as a really important achievement for talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government. And there's a lot of hope in Afghanistan that the Taliban will come to see ISIS as their real enemy and that they will view the Afghan government as a possible partner in the fight against ISIS and against other militant groups. That's probably a stretch too far right now, Eric, but the fact that the Afghan government and the Taliban were able to agree to some type of ceasefire, while it wasn't perfect, it did hold for about 3 days, and that the ISIS militants used this to attack the Taliban fighters there. There is a lot of hope that this may lead to some type of understanding between the Afghan government and the Taliban, that there are much more in common in terms of where they see Afghanistan going, that they will work together to battle ISIS. That is still a real far step away from where we are today. But there is a lot of hope right now, Eric, that this is a stepping stone.
All right, Connor. Thanks so much. Martha?
Eric, President Trump touting his historic summit with Kim Jong-un and defending his decision to suspend American military exercises with South Korea. How the president is pushing back against his critics. That's straight ahead. Plus the Inspector General report turning into the latest Washington battleground as the president claims it puts him in the clear in the Russia investigation. Is he right? We'll take this up next.
Michael Horowitz proved what we wanted the FBI and the DOJ to do, which is that you can have an investigation that is fact-centric and fair and even-handed.
President Trump saying the DOJ Inspector General's report totally exonerates him of allegations of Russian collusion or obstruction of justice. House Oversight Committee Chair Trey Gowdy was asked if he believes that's true. Here's what he had to say.
We've got Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, the two FBI employees, Chris, and this is what's most important to me. Those two presumed and pronounced Hillary Clinton's innocence before her investigation ended, and they presumed and pronounced Donald Trump's guilt before the investigation even began. So when you have that pervasiveness of bias, yes, it's going to help the person who is complaining about the investigation.
Joining me now is Robert Ray, former Whitewater Independent Counsel and a former federal prosecutor. Very good to have you here.
Nice to be with you.
On this Sunday. Happy Father's Day.
Thank you very much.
First, I'd like to get your overall reaction to the IG's report, its scope, its discovery, its objectivity.
Well, the scope is relevant. The president's point actually is a piece of the Inspector General's investigation that was not the subject of this report, which is the origins of Russia investigation. But on the other hand, Mr. Gowdy and the president are correct that the report, which was done by a professional career prosecutor, Michael Horowitz, I know well. We served together in the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York. And he did an admirable job, I think, in part lending credence to the president's view about this, which is that there were certain quarters within the FBI that demonstrated bias. Whether or not that had an effect on the investigation, I suppose, is always going to be open to question. But the president is correct that there was a cancer within the FBI, and obviously steps are going to need to be taken to cleanse that cancer.
And FBI Director Christopher Wray has said that
spoke to that issue.
Yeah, he spoke to that issue. He's already on it.
So he took it. I mean, he's taken it seriously as well, as it should be taken.
Absolutely. I mean, the ladies and gentlemen of the FBI, they work hard, and they certainly don't want to have the entire department tainted by, you know,
right, and I don't think we're talking about, generally speaking, line prosecutors here, although there were a few, obviously, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, who had issues, and I don't imagine that Peter Strzok is going to last the balance of next week, remaining as an employee of the FBI. Mm-hmm. But overall, I think the message that was disappointing and disheartening is the fact that really from the President of the United States, meaning President Obama, on down into the Justice Department, there were an awful lot of people who, frankly, in my view, demonstrated a colossal failure of leadership.
Well, how did President Obama fail?
Well, I think he prejudged the investigation early on into the Hillary email matter as early as October of 2015 with his 60 Minutes interview, and that had sort of a downside effect with regard to everybody that touched this in a political way. I think the disappointing thing were the political appointees from Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, to the Deputy Attorney General, Sally Yates, to the FBI director, all were trying to react in certain ways in order to sort of compensate for the fact, and let's leave blame where really blame should be. The blame ultimately is with Hillary Clinton, who shouldn't have done what she did with, with the emails. But as a result of that investigation, an awful lot of people were positioning themselves in the political process instead of doing what they should have been doing, which was their jobs.
And there's another part to that, which is some of from President Obama, Attorney General Loretta Lynch, and on down, they were concerned about the appearance of maybe trying to tip the scale in favor of Hillary Clinton, and they were very skeptical of doing that. But I want to move on.
And I think a lot of them were angling for positions in what they expected to be a new administration. So, you know, there's all that sort of political undertow to this whole thing.
Is there anything, Bob, in the IG's report that could help or potentially be problematic for the president, his attorneys, because he says this totally exonerates him?
I don't know about that, because remember, this is on a discrete portion of the investigation. There's nothing to say about the obstruction of justice piece of this. It doesn't have anything to say about Russia collusion. What it does have to say is what motivated people in terms of their initial actions when these investigations were opened. And I think he's quite right, and it does lend support to his argument that you might very well question the origins of the Russia collusion investigation.
And getting to that, here you are, former Whitewater independent counsel. Will this report sway how Special Counsel Mueller will proceed with his investigation? Does it prove that there's a conflict of interest on his part, or question his integrity or impartiality?
I don't think it questions his integrity or impartiality. I don't think that it undermines the integrity of the overall investigation. What I do think is that it's going to be something that he's going to take the measure of. I imagine we're going to reach a point here where the president has to decide, in light of the political situation as we currently find it, whether or not, big decision, does he submit to an interview by Bob Mueller's office? At one time, I thought that it was more likely than not that that would happen. I now think it's less likely to happen. I think Bob Mueller will nevertheless issue a report with regard to, quote-unquote, Russia collusion portion of the investigation.
Is it time for him to wrap that investigation?
I believe so. I mean, you can just look at the poll numbers. I have said from the very beginning, independent counsels, special counsels have a limited amount of time with public sentiment behind them in order to do their job. Once you get to the point of 18 months into things, and we're going to fast approach that point, it's time to wrap it up. And I hope, in the country's interest and in the interest of the administration, most importantly, you know, consistent with public sentiment, it's time to have the benefit of the findings of the investigation insofar as the president is concerned, and I think that can be done before the midterm elections. So yes, it's time to bring it to a conclusion.
Is the Russia probe the Whitewater of 2018?
Well, I hope not, but, you know, whatever it is, it's time to make the findings available so that the electorate can make informed decisions with regard to the midterm elections. And I also think it's not in the country's best interest to have a special counsel hanging over the entirety of an administration. That really shouldn't be the normal course of events. I think, you know, there's an investigation, there's a task, it's serious, but a limited amount of time to discharge that mandate. And then once that, you know, is accomplished and you can issue findings, the findings should be issued.
Is it serious, you say? Is it a witch hunt?
I don't think it's a witch hunt. I do think that Bob Mueller is a professional. I understand that the president is right to push back so that this does not go on indefinitely. And he's correct about that, and that's his way of sort of trying to move and position the Mueller investigation so that it doesn't last forever. He's right about that point. And I do think, though, that Bob Mueller recognizes that as well. I don't think that this will extend indefinitely. And I think there's a fair chance that we may see the conclusion of most of the investigation by October.
By October. Okay. Robert Ray, thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Appreciate your perspective. Thank you. Eric?
Well, meanwhile, Arthel, gunmen opened fire at an arts festival in New Jersey, wounding 22 people. What police are now saying about a possible motive, we are live on the ground in Trenton coming up. Plus, First Lady Melania Trump, well, she now is weighing in on the immigration debate. Mrs. Trump views the separation of families at the southern border. But first, here's Kellyanne Conway.
The president is ready to get meaningful immigration reform across the board. And Chuck, let me just tell you that nobody likes seeing babies ripped from their mother's arms. What the president is saying is if the Democrats are serious, they'll come together again and try to close these loopholes.
Tonight, the new Fox Report with John Scott.
This just in, a great story here. Busy week at the White House. There were lots of warning signs. More on all of this now. The stock market back up. America is back.
Don't miss Fox Report, Saturdays and Sundays.
Fox News alert out of Texas. 4 immigrants have been killed and several others were injured when they were ejected from a car during a rollover crash there. 5 of the injured, we are told, are at San Antonio Medical Center, including the driver. That driver, believed to be a United States citizen. Another 4 of the victims taken to other hospitals. Another person, who's also believed to be a U.S. citizen, is currently in custody. We don't know if this was part of any immigration push by law enforcement or just simply an accident. We will give you more information as we get it.
Fox News Alert, First Lady Melania Trump now weighing in on her husband's immigration policy. In a statement a short time ago, a spokeswoman for Mrs. Trump saying the First Lady hates seeing children separated from their families at the southern border and that she believes, quote, that the country should govern with heart. Garrett Tenney is live from the White House now. Hi, Garrett.
Well, Arthel, it's not often that we hear from the First Lady, particularly on policy issues. The few exceptions to that have been when children were involved. You'll remember last month she launched her Be Best campaign, which is focused on promoting the overall well-being of children. So with nearly 2,000 children being separated from their parents at the border, this is an issue that she wanted to speak out on. Today, her office tells us Ms. Trump hates to see children separated from their families and hopes both sides of the aisle can finally come together to achieve successful immigration reform. She believes we need to be a country that follows all laws, but also a country that governs with heart. Now, some are pointing to that statement as veiled criticism of her husband, but it's important to point out that when President Trump was asked about this issue on Friday, he used some of that very same language.
Do you agree with children being taken away from
No, I hate it. I hate the children being taken away. The Democrats forced that law upon our nation. I hate it. I hate to see separation of parents and children.
The White House is starting to get some pushback to this policy from its allies, though, including former communications director Anthony Scaramucci, who says the policy is not congruent with American values and it could cost the president's support with his voters if it isn't fixed.
The president's going to get hurt by this issue if it stays out there very, very long, because unfortunately, because he's the commander-in-chief, he's at the top of the food chain of the government, even if it's the Democrats' fault, he's going to get tarred with it. And so my recommendation would, let's fix this immediately, because what we have to stand for in our society is our American values.
Yeah, this weekend, the president has not backed down on that policy, though, and maintains that it is the Democrats' fault that his administration is put in this position where it needs to have this policy, saying that the loopholes in our immigration system are issues that the Democrats have refused to address. Arthel?
Hey, Garrett, the White House is also pushing back on criticism over the summit with North Korea. What is the president saying about that?
Yeah, one of the main points of criticism the White House has been hearing is from the president's decision to cancel the joint military exercises with South Korea. That decision caught our allies in the region off guard, including South Korea. But today, the president defended the move, saying on Twitter, holding back the war games during the negotiations was my request because they are very expensive, and set a bad light during a good faith negotiation, also quite provocative. Can start up immediately if talks break down, which I hope will not happen. And at the end of an extremely busy week, the president took a little break today to celebrate Father's Day, playing a full 18 rounds of golf at Trump National Golf Course, and just to return to the White House this past hour. Arthel?
All right. Happy Father's Day to the president as well. Garrett Tenney, thank you. Eric.
And Arthel, for more on the growing debate over the summit with Kim Jong-un and what was achieved, Gordon Chang is here, Asian analyst who you know and author of the book Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World, and that they have certainly done. Gordon, first of all, what steps should Kim Jong-un take for us to see that he is actually serious about denuclearization? And if he does not take these steps, he showed that he's full of it.
Yeah, the most important thing right now is for Kim to give a full accounting of the number of nuclear weapons he has, how much fissile material he possesses, also the number of ballistic missiles. It's just a sort of a very simple thing, because it's really hard to disarm a country if you don't know what they have in the first place.
Do you think they'll give that up?
I guess so. I mean, at this particular point, it's a question, of course they don't want to do that. It's a question of how much pressure the U.S. is going to put on him. President Trump is supposed to have this phone call with Kim Jong-un in a few hours. We don't know exactly when, but I imagine that something like this would be on the agenda for that phone call.
What should the president tell him?
The president should tell him, look, the United States is willing to put all this pressure back on if he's not willing to give up his weapons. I mean, it's a very simple thing. Trump made a lot of concessions to get this summit. He sort of laid the groundwork. Kim has no excuses anymore. And so, I think, Trump should say, look, I'm going to have the exercises go back on. I'm going to put sanctions on like you've never seen before. I'm going to go after Russia and China. All the types of things that Kim doesn't want to hear. That's what he's got to say if Kim is recalcitrant.
Do you think the president will actually go down a list? Do you think they've prepared a list for him to say, this is what we need you to do, X, Y, and Z?
I hope they did that. You know, it's very difficult to understand what's going on inside the White House and whether Trump has a list, whether he'll actually follow it. He's very instinctual. Sometimes his instincts are great and sometimes they're not so great. You know, and I just don't know what he'll say on a phone call with Kim.
Yeah, and meanwhile, you've got the issue of China and you've got the trade situation in the background, and that is beginning to blow up, too.
Yes, it is. And, you know, the United States needs to, and first of all, go after China's theft of intellectual property. We have these Section 301 tariffs that were identified on Friday. We absolutely have to do that because China is stealing intellectual property from the U.S. in the hundreds of billions of dollars a year. We have an innovation-based economy now. If we are not able to take advantage of that innovation, we don't really have an economy anymore.
And finally, the final question, which I think is fascinating on the Iranian nuclear deal, that has to do with the fact that the Iranians actually have power not for the international inspectors to inspect a military site. Do you think that that same thing would happen in North Korea, and what would happen if it did?
Yeah. You know, when we have an agreement, we have to have anytime, any place inspections. We got to go to military bases because this was the problem. The Iranians said that we weren't able to do that. The IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, which was actually doing this inspections, was very reluctant to talk to the Iranians about this and actually inspect military sites. This is critical.
It's unbelievable that they have that power over the international community. But Gordon, thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Well, meanwhile, in his new book, 3 Days in Moscow, Bret Baier takes a look at the role played by former President Ronald Reagan in bringing the Cold War to its inevitable end and the subsequent collapse of the Soviet Union. You know, in the book, Bret zooms in on that fourth and final summit in Moscow that was held between President Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev. Bret spoke with several key players in Mr. Reagan's orbit during the time. Here's a part of that one-hour special that'll be on the Fox News channel later tonight that highlights those 3 historic days.
The trip to Moscow wrote itself. The great Cold Warrior Ronald Reagan in the heart of the evil empire, literally in Red Square. So you knew this was going to be very special.
I distinctly remember President Reagan getting on Marine One and somebody yells a question, you know, what are you hoping for? And he says something like, sometimes the final act is the best act.
You got it. But you also have to know when to leave center stage.
That's right. That's right.
That's his other line that he used to use.
Well, it looks like a very special program later on tonight, just a few hours from now. 3 Days in Moscow, a fascinating behind-the-scenes look, of course, hosted by Bret, at 8 and 11 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Fox News Channel. Arthel?
Very good. Well, several firefighters rushed to the hospital as a 5-alarm fire ripped through several buildings. Plus, the Trump administration feeling the pressure amid public outcry to stop the separation of families at the border. Can lawmakers come together for a solution? Shots ring out at a New Jersey arts festival, injuring 22 people. The gunfire happening early this morning. Right now, 4 victims are in critical condition, fighting for their lives. Brian Yennis is live in Trenton. And Brian, what are you learning about the suspects?
Hi, Arthel. Well, about the suspects, we're about to learn more. There's a press conference that's about to start any moment now. But there is one suspect, a 33-year-old male, who was shot dead by police in this incident that started at 2:50 in the morning. Another suspect was taken into custody. This is what we know. Here at this Art All Night Festival at about 2:50 this morning, 22 people were injured, 17 by gunshot. 4 people are in critical condition, including a 13-year-old boy who is said to be in, quote, extreme critical condition. This all happened, really, police say this was an altercation between individuals. The Art All Night Festival was not the target of an attack. Rather, they were caught in the crossfire of an altercation between several suspects. We'll find out more details in just a few moments. Listen to what some of the witnesses said about just really the chaos of this morning.
People just started running around like crazy and pushing and shoving, and then I heard the gunshots. It's sad that it was such a way to bring everybody together, and it's ruined.
This Art All Night Festival is a community event. It allows people to come here for free to look at about 1,500 plus pieces of art. There were about 1,000 people inside of this venue at the time of the shooting. The event was canceled, obviously, after this horrific incident. They released a statement saying, quote, "We're very shocked. We're deeply saddened. Our hearts ache and our eyes are blurry, but our dedication and resolve to building a better Trenton through community, creativity, and inspiration will never fade. Not tonight, not ever." Again, one suspect dead, another in custody, and this all happening at 2:50 this morning. And our thoughts and prayers are with those who are injured, including that 13-year-old boy who is in extreme critical condition at this hour, from what we understand. We'll find out more about this. Again, there was a carjacking also immediately after this shooting in a back alley, so we will also find out more about the potential connection to that. Arthel?
Brian Yennis, thank you.
Well, it was quite a scene last night on Staten Island, New York. There was a massive house alarm fire. It was a 5-alarm fire that quickly expanded to engulf 4 nearby buildings, and that sent thick black smoke into the air. 20 firefighters were injured in this, 4 listed in serious, but they're in stable condition, thankfully. Investigators are now trying to figure out exactly what sparked those flames. Meanwhile, the scathing Inspector General's report on Hillary Clinton's email investigation, it takes center stage this week. A Senate hearing and one at the House. What will the author, IG Michael Horowitz, say? At a Fox News alert in Texas, where 5 immigrants were killed, several others were injured when they were ejected from a vehicle during a rollover crash. This happening just north of Laredo. You see the Chevy Suburban there, in which those victims and the driver were in that vehicle. Police say there were speeds up to 100 miles an hour. The driver is believed to be a United States citizen. Another person who was in that vehicle, also expected to be, is in custody, is a U.S. citizen, we're told. It is not clear what caused that crash or if it was part of an immigration operation or pursuit. We will bring you more information on this tragedy in Texas as we get it.
The House preparing to vote this week on 2 immigration bills amid outrage over the policy of migrant children being separated from their parents at the border. The policy sparking heated debate on Capitol Hill. Joining me now is Teresa Cardinal Brown, Director of Immigration and Cross-Border Policy for the Bipartisan Policy Center and former Department of Homeland Security official. And it's good to have you on this issue. Want to get right to it. In your opinion, how you see it, what is the biggest irritant of this issue right now?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. The push in Congress started because many members really wanted to see a solution for the DACA program, the program that the president tried to terminate last fall. And that started the push. But what was happening at the same time is the president saw that there was still a large number or an increasing number of families with children arriving at the southern border. So these 2 issues have somewhat merged in the congressional debate. What started out as a push to address the Dreamers and the DACA population is now being merged with efforts that the president wants to see to change the law in ways that he hopes will deter further immigration at the southwest border.
So do you take issue with the way that they're proceeding at the moment with the zero tolerance policy, and do you have any options in mind?
Well, certainly the administration has said, and they believe that by being essentially harsher on those who arrive, they intend to try to deter people from arriving. But the real issue is that the cases, that if they come and claim asylum, it takes about 2 years right now because of the backlogs in our immigration courts for those cases to be heard. And so the issue is what happens while people are waiting. The current policy means that parents and children are likely to be separated and that the children will be placed in some sort of care and the parents will be in detention during that entire 2-year period. And I think that's what we're seeing as problematic.
But
what
should be done instead?
Well, another way to deal with it is instead of putting the resources toward prosecuting individuals coming over the border or additional detention, how about we double or triple the number of immigration judges in the immigration courts to clear out that backlog, send them down to the border and allow the cases to be heard, due process, our process to work. It can be done fairly quickly in a matter of weeks or a couple of months. People will know whether or not they can stay in the United States or they'll be sent back to their
but what
country.
happens to the migrants while they're waiting for those hearings, even if it's a couple of weeks or a couple of months? Are they held? And if not, will they flee into the U.S.?
Well, there are different ways that can be done. Alternatives to detention can include ankle bracelets, regular monitoring. Those are things that have been tried under previous administrations and have worked to get people to come back to the court. But if if the time it takes to hear your case is shorter, it's easier for the government to keep track of you. If it's 2 years, it's a lot harder, and that's why there's a push now for detention.
President Trump is meeting with White House Republicans Tuesday. What should he tell the lawmakers?
I think he needs to be very clear about what he wants and what he will support. There were 2 bills that are out there. One was by Chairman Goodlatte of the House Judiciary Committee. The other was negotiated by Speaker Ryan with moderate and conservative members of the Republican Party. The president was kind of unclear at the end of the week about what he really wanted, but we know that his people, that his negotiators were up on the Hill working with the Republicans as they were negotiating these bills. So if he's not on board with what his people are saying, they need to hear from very clearly what he wants. The other thing to bear in mind, though, is that they're trying to figure out if they can get enough votes to pass something with just Republican votes. That's going to be hard because, honestly, the conservative Republicans and the moderate Republicans are in pretty different places on this, and they haven't yet talked to any Democrats to try to see if they can negotiate with them.
Well, the Democrats definitely have to come to the table as well. We have to leave it there. Teresa Cardinal Brown, thank you very much, and we'll be right back. Thank you so much. An unusual presidential image, a South Carolina man capturing these photos. He says when he looked up in the sky, he could clearly make out the silhouette of President Trump. The cloud formation was spotted on June 14th, which happens to be the president's birthday.
That's unbelievable. Look at that.
Is that Photoshop? I don't know.
Is it? Well, you actually see my
cool
dog.
looking either way.
I go up and see my dog, or not the president.